If you don't bring your audience value, you are of no value to the marketer.
What are the other aspects of that?
Well, there's people.
Hello and welcome to Break Free with TopRank Marketing. I'm Joshua Nite, Senior Content Marketing Manager, and I'm here today with the CTO Advisor, Keith Townsend. Keith, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming in. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
I am the principal of the CTO Advisor, LLC. We offer IT advisory, obviously, is the obvious part of our business. And the other part, we create what some people might call content marketing services for many of the large vendors in our space.
Content marketing I'm very familiar with, but that almost sounds like that does seem like a dual purpose of providing the service, but then the content marketing. How does that look how does that play out in practice?
So in practice, which is a really interesting lesson learned, we created the business with this model in place where we thought we would, in practice, do 60% advisory work and 40% content marketing. In reality, we found that there was a much larger demand for vendors to get out their message versus for individual companies to do these one-off engagements for advisory work. So we find that more of our business is positioned towards content marketing than it is advisory.
So you're helping vendors tell their story about their technology infrastructure? Is that it?
Yeah, so the great thing about still doing the advisory work is that we get the real world experience and get active feedback from clients. So it's kind of pseudo research. If we were to be compared to our analyst peers, we get the real world experience. We can bring that back to the vendors, which help them to, one, improve their messaging, and then two, offer kind of this authenticity towards the content we create when we partner with the companies.
I can imagine a CTO seems like a relatively new job title, but it also seems like one that's very necessary, especially right now. How have you seen that role kind of develop and evolve?
So it's really interesting because not only is it a new title, but it's a title that many technologists want to claim because it has the word chief and the word officer squunched in the middle is the term technologist. So it is a very, very attractive title. However, it varies heavily between who you talk to. If you're talking to a vendor, you're usually talking about a role in which you're either creating technology to sell or you're in the field selling technology. When you're talking to an end customer, someone who's actually consuming and putting these technologies into place, that function has been there for the past couple of dozen of decades. We might have called it chief architect, etc. But this role where you have this executive like individual contributor who guides the path for the organization's technology. And that's the audience I usually cater to.
Have you seen that role change just in the past decade or so? It makes sense that they've been around as long as there has been a need to move information around a business. But what changes are you seeing as the rate of technology continues to develop?
Well, the importance of technology and the ability to reduce the friction between that technology and the business. So, we're bringing in our own devices. We perfectly expect today to come in with our iPhone, get our email on our iPhone, conduct business on our mobile devices, basically use our personal devices as an extension. That's because that's what the smaller startups and the agile companies are doing. So when you have a large organization that has brownfield, what we call brownfield in IT, this environment in which you have, SAP, Oracle, green screens, mainframes alongside, Salesforce.com, Office 365, Google SaaS offerings. And you need to stitch all of that together, that has probably impacted that role more than any other thing. As consumers of technology, we just expect these things to integrate and work well together. CTOs are challenged today with making these consumer-like technologies, or better yet, bringing a consumer-like experience to the enterprise. And that was not the case 20 years ago. You kind of got what you got. You came into the office, there was a beige computer on your desk, and that's what you got. If it was hard to use, well, this is enterprise IT.
I wonder, do you think that this is a trend that's going to continue, or one where there might be a backlash? Because I'm thinking about how for a while it was every computer is just a terminal for a mainframe. And then it was, well, no, we're going to bring the computing power to everyone's desk. We're going to give everyone their own PC or laptop. And now with the cloud, we're almost getting back into a lot of that computing power is not happening at your desk anymore. So do you feel like this trend of like blurring these lines is going to continue, or are people going to go, well, hold on, maybe we just need to keep these things separated?
Yeah, I think the expectations are going to continue to increase. People are going to expect to have the power of the mainframe in their pocket. Plain and simple. When I ask Siri a question on my iPhone and I don't get the right answer or the answer that I'm looking for, and if you think about what needs to happen in the process, it's reasonable for it not to return an answer. But my, kind of consumer brain is like, what do you mean you can't give me this complex business answer that pulls together 5 different data sources? It's a simple question, but getting that answer, not so simple. Not even if you gave me a terminal and access to all the computing power in the world, it would still be very difficult for me to stitch together the answer. But the expectation is that we can simply ask that question of our digital assistant.
So you see these barriers between work and home, and then the devices that we use at work and home will continue to erode more than snap back.
Absolutely. I think Apple and Samsung and Google and Microsoft, all of these technology companies have democratized this super high-end, super complex technology. We say we expect to have the power of a mainframe in our pocket. We actually have a supercomputer in our pocket with a modern day phone, and the interface is extremely simple to use. And the power that we have every time that I'm on a road trip and I'm watching a YouTube video over 4G network or LTE, or I'm getting work done, etc. I'm always, as a technologist, I'm always amazed at how far we come. But then when I go back into my enterprise and I have to put on my enterprise security hat and data scientist type role, I'm always challenged with how far we have to go.
Security is an interesting point to bring up for sure. And that's got to be a huge headache for IT, where you do have these devices that all are going to have various degrees of being locked down. Is that one of the central challenges that you're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, especially in this pandemic work from home culture, we're working with virtual teams more, and that need to give access to data to our business partners have become a challenge. Even in my small firm, I spun up a recent study for one of the large cloud providers, and I find it ironic that I struggle to set up a model in which I'm working with 5 or 6 different collaborators on a set of data that I can't protect with the 4 walls of my data center. And this is me doing a study for a cloud provider, which is by definition the type of service provider that provides the capability. The logic needed to actually apply these technical security controls to a active working group, still a pretty decent challenge, and it's not just a technology challenge.
That intrigues me. It's not just a technology challenge. What are the other aspects of that?
Well, there's people involved. Up until recently, I've been a phone Luddite, not from the sense that I don't want to use an iPhone. I absolutely love this device from a productivity and what it's done for my life. Because of that, I don't necessarily want my employers, when I worked for a company, I didn't want my employer to have access to my device. My device was my device. And if you wanted to put your mail system on my device, that was just a hard no. So that's not a technology problem. That is a just culturally what's acceptable. Another, we're all working from home now. And do I have two setups? Do I have a work laptop and my home laptop on my desk? No, now the Luddite in me is starting to disappear. I only want one setup, but I want that in a way that is convenient to me. I don't want to have to keep connecting to the VPN every time it drops to access the company data. When I want to share data with an external provider, I don't want to use Box and Dropbox and Google File and Office 365 are super powerful. I don't want to connect to the VPN to enable that simple sharing thing. It's much easier for me as a user to just go into Dropbox and say share with this external partner. Those are the things that are not necessarily technical challenges, but more cultural.
How do you think leaders can start bridging some of those divides and meeting those challenges?
So the obvious thing is, I think, education. You need to help users understand why it's even important. I don't like pulling my car into the garage every night because sometimes it's just convenient to leave it out in the driveway. However, my car opens my garage door, which once my garage door is open, allows easy access into my home because that's the way I've set up the security around my house. People don't come to my house and try and get into my car, get into my garage. But once I educated myself on the threat, I pull my car into the garage every night. So there's a barrier of entry into my home. While slightly more inconvenient, it is well worth the sense of security. So executives, security executives, CIOs, etc., really need to help users understand why they need a second piece of authentication, etc. It's on us to make these things available with less friction, but it's also on the users and technologists to help each other understand the barriers and the risks associated.
That makes a lot of sense to have to get that buy-in, because no amount of telling people you should do this will make them do it if they don't understand why. But you've also now got me wanting to go clean out my garage, because I do park my car in my driveway, and my car does have a garage door opener in it. But that's a 12-hour task for another day. Let's see, just looking at my list here. Oh yeah, so I wanted to talk about like a future vision, and that is a question that has changed a whole lot as the entire world has turned upside down and is doing another somersault, and maybe we might come upright at some point. How do you envision the IT infrastructure, the industry that you're in, evolving in the next year? And how many of these changes that we're looking at are part of a new normal, or there is no normal, or, where do you see us going in the near future?
That's a really tough question. I pride myself in being able to see where the puck is headed versus where the puck is at. Just the response to the pandemic, the existing, and then the social issues that we're having around race, etc., complicates the act of doing business. And IT is led, or most of the time is led by the pace of business. I would have never thought that there was actually a real use case for cloud bursting. The idea that I don't have enough capacity in my private data center and I'm going to burst out to the public cloud. That was kind of the first and most marketed use cases for cloud, and it just never came. And then in an instant, there was the need for thousands of employees in a single organization to work from home versus a few dozen or a couple of hundred. That's where cloud bursting like became real. So that's a tremendous shock to IT, not just from we go from this model of using technology and enabling people to work remotely to this other one, but the way we operate IT. Before it was just in the four walls of our data center. Now we're going into an accelerated adoption of public cloud because we just need the capacity. And then a year from now, as we adjust, we have to figure out what the new normal will be. The new normal won't be this, maybe 20% of the capacity is coming from our data center and 80% of the capacity is coming from the cloud. That's an emergency state. Once we leave the emergency state, the new normal won't be what it looked like 6 months ago, but it also won't look like it looks today. So there will be a balancing that we'll have to do as far as the number of people that are working from home, how they're working, how they're being productive. And that includes what times of the day that they're working, who they're collaborating with, etc. A lot of this is in flux and extremely hard to predict. So with that, my kind of core advice is don't depend on what we're doing today as the long-term and to-be state of what's going to happen tomorrow. The bill would come from us using cloud as an emergency means to add capacity, to enable collaboration. Those things will become normalized, and we'll look at the cost of that and say, how can we improve upon the cost and effectiveness and the security associated with delivering services that we do and collaborating with our external business partners. So I guess that in short, things are just constantly change and be prepared for this consistent change of pace. That part will stay consistent.
It is interesting to see now that people who are working from home have seen that it is possible, and maybe in some ways it's preferable. And like CEOs are seeing that they do have the capacity to do that, and that it might be more viable than before. That might be a bell that we can't unring. Do you think that we might see more work from home, if not at the level we're seeing now, but definitely a shift in that direction?
For work from home?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Michael Dell commented that work from home, the rate at which he's going to allow employees to work from home has completely changed. Work from home is now a fixture at Dell, whereas Dell was one of those organizations where working from home was not, a readily available feature. HPE and HP, for example, went from a policy in which they allow remote work or allow remote work to calling all their employees to work centralized to now allowing them to work from home again. There's a tremendous number of advantages to that. I am, if you're listening to this versus watching it, I am an African American. So racial diversity in the workforce is super important to me, as well as gender diversity and all different types of diversity. Silicon Valley is not a diverse workforce in general. Matter of fact, it's called Silicon Valley. But I think what my contemporaries are seeing is that by having this excuse to work from home and having talent, not having to have to commute into a central office has expanded the talent pool. And you're finding the best and brightest people where they're at versus where you want them to be, which is in the Valley. My son just got a job with a company located in Austin, Texas, and he may have to move a year or so from now. But right now, he got a job that he would not have otherwise gotten because we've been forced to accept the work from home model.
Well, that is fascinating. I hadn't thought about how the geography of housing and location matters so much to the types of people that get hired, and can be one of the contributing factors, one of many, to the lack of diversity in the workplace. And so that this might actually be a force for democratizing work a little bit. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
I like to give this really silly, but I think effective example of why diversity is so hard. If you look at my wife's hair, like hair, just literally the hair on top of her head, and she moves to Silicon Valley, where does she go to get her hair done? Or where does she go to get uh, 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 makeup, et cetera, et cetera? How do we continue our life? How do we become included in the area where there's just isn't anyone that look like us? So we can't even get uh, the fashion that we're accustomed to, or the hairdresser that knows how to even cut a black man's head. Is some of these things that working from home kind of eliminates some of this.
That is interesting. And if you're a hiring director, maybe you haven't even thought about the ecosystem around people, at being able to stay in their ecosystem. Like for me, it was just realizing I can do without my commute. There are dozens of podcasts that can go and listen to. I don't mind. Now I just need to get my kids out of this house so that I can work in there. But we're not quite there yet as far as the schools go. But no, that's a lot to think about. Thank you. So I do want to talk about, shifting gears here, about that other part of the business, about the content marketing, but also about being someone who other marketers would come to create content with, or someone who has built an audience to following. How did you go about building that audience and becoming a leader, an expert in this space?
Well, I think the saying is being stupidly consistent or be consistent stupid. Uh, it is really, I think, one of the biggest hurdles in becoming a influencer. And I'm fine with calling it being a influencer, a thought leader, or whatever you want to call it. So you have to put your thoughts out there. And sometimes putting your thoughts out there is the scariest part about becoming quote unquote an influencer, but let's just call it known within your industry. And it's consistent throughout. There has been times where I've absolutely put my foot in my mouth, and that I've completely gotten, I don't want to say embarrassed myself, but gotten something wrong. Probably the greatest example is where I called out the father of software defined networking, this new movement in networking, which is super important in the technology, enterprise technology. And I basically called it vaporware. The person is Martin Casado. He now works for A16Z as a general partner. And he invited me, I posted this article to a very popular uh, industry magazine, online industry magazine. He read it, he reached out to me and said, hey, why don't we, if you're in town, why don't we, have a burrito and we'll talk about it. And he scooped me over a burrito. It was probably, I wish I would have paid for the burrito, then I would have at least felt a little bit better about it. But that it is that simple. Just starting to put your thoughts out and ideas out there. That interaction, while a little bit embarrassing for me because I got something so basic so wrong, introduced me to Martin Casado. And we continue to have conversations on social media, in person, at conferences. When we went, the next conference we went to, he's on stage and he gives me a head. And like, I'm just some schmuck with a blog. So the basic step is just, putting your thoughts out there for your peers to challenge.
What led you to start putting your thoughts out there? Was there a conscious attempt to build an audience and get a following, or was that something that just happened as a result of what you wanted to get out there in the world?
So I'm trying not to have a revisionist history of my career. I had gotten laid off during the last Great Recession, and it was very, very difficult to find a job. It took me a year to find a new job. So one of the hacks that I had learned was that if you blog, then you kind of have your name out there and you start to establish yourself in the career. So initially it was to protect my career and my livelihood. And that worked for the most part. The next time that I was in the market for a job, I literally put out there that I quit my job and I'm looking for a job, and that helped me find a new job. Uh, However, that led to me, I loved it so much that led to me thinking about, for a few years, how do I actually make a living doing this? Because I like it so much. How do I get paid to do it? And that eventually led to the CTO Advisor, but that's a whole journey in itself.
Yeah, once you asked that question, how do I get paid to do it? I said, oh, tell me, how do we get paid to do it? Is there a Cliff's Notes version that you can give me?
Yeah, I think the thing that I settled on, that what influencers do, bloggers or whatever you want to, when you put your thoughts out there, that has value. And keeping that authentic voice is, one, extremely difficult, especially as you start to get paid, and two, extremely important so that you can extract value from it. Just like in every transaction, you have to find somebody who finds value in the services that you're offering and that's willing to pay for it. Generally speaking, there's two paths you can go down. You can become a evangelist, an advocate, or et cetera for a technology company and make pretty good money talking about a company's product, services, et cetera, and advocating or evangelizing that solution. That is a very good and sound career path to go under, and you get paid well. I wrote a blog post a few years ago that VMware was hiring all the great bloggers because VMware believed in community and believed in these voices, and that's paid off for them. However, those voices are kind of limited to talking about that one track. The other option is to go down this route that I went down, which is to become an independent influencer, which is a little more difficult because there's not quite an established marketplace for the things that I do. So it's going to the likes of TopRank marketing or working directly with vendors to find out, how do I help a vendor tell us their story, but keep my authentic voice, so that when the next time, if I'm talking to SAP one day, we're talking about their HANA in-memory database, and I'm going to Oracle and we're talking about their in-memory database. It's a consistent Keith and a consistent CTO Advisor message across the two, so that as I'm taking money from each, my audience still respects the actual voice. So if there's a Cliff Notes version, there you go.
Mm-hmm. That is the challenge, and something that we sometimes have to explain to folks who are just starting out with being an influencer is, we don't want you to come in and say, I recommend that you do things this way because Dell thinks you should do them this way. We want to say, Dell has their point of view here, and then we want you to have your point of view here, and they're both going to be of interest to our audience. But I think that's where the divide between an influencer and an endorsement is, and you got to stay on the right side of that. It's really tricky. Have you been involved with any campaigns that you felt were really innovative or just a joy to work on because they were doing something intriguing to you?
You know what? You probably just you without knowing it. We talked about, do I want to see the questions beforehand? I'm like, no, I like these off the cuff conversations. You just threw me a softball. I am building a data center. Literally, I rented out space in a colo facility. I bought some Dell gear. I put it together. I implemented circuits. I hired engineers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm building a data center so that, not to host customer data, but specifically to appeal to my customers, my primary customers, who are the SAPs, Dell, Intels of the world, in which they come to me and tell their story. And I validate that story. So For example, I built the data center, and I'm working with Intel to tell a Intel-centric story about modernizing the data center, going from 4 or 5 year old Intel technology to a completely modernized data center that includes cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So, not to toot my own horn, I'm pretty certain no one else in the industry is doing this crazy thing, and it is one of the most challenging things that I've ever done in my career, and also one of the most exciting projects I've worked on, especially from a content marketing perspective.
I could see that because you can tell the story of building the data center, and then once it's done, then you have this thing that is a new platform for even more storytelling on behalf of brands or for your own personal brand. That is really, really cool. I've never heard of anything like that. So we want to know, though, if a marketer is going to reach out to you and ask for, a quote or just to make some content with you, are there things that make you more likely to say yes, and are there things that are a deal breaker for you?
So deal breakers, that's a really interesting thing. I've had marketers reach out to me, especially in recent times because lead gen is so difficult right now. One of the things that are absolutely just, we can end the conversation is when they're asking me to basically get earned, what we in the industry called earned media, and it's not really earned media. So basically saying, hey, you know what, we see that you write for these industry rags. Would it be okay if you mentioned us as part of this project? Would it be okay for you to mention us without saying that, I'm getting paid? That's like absolutely no. My viewers need to, and the people who consume my content need to understand when I'm getting paid. Whether it's going to always be my independent voice, but just from an ethics perspective, my content consumers have to understand when I'm getting paid and who's paying me. What I'm finding less appealing are ad hoc projects. So if I don't have a relationship with you already and you want to sponsor a CTO Advisor, CTO dose video, that's not very interesting to me. I want to tell stories, and I can't tell in a single piece of content. If I have an ongoing relationship with a vendor, we've talked about Dell a lot, we talked about HPE a lot, SAP, etc. I have a history with those vendors. So when I create ad hoc pieces of content with those vendors, it's a continuation of my audience is picking up on a story that's been long running. So I'm less, enthused about a new marketer coming to me with one off and say, hey, let's record a podcast, etc. The buying experience is really complicated, and my audience needs to understand how a marketer that I'm bringing to them really fits in the overall discussion.
That'll make our CEO real happy, because we are the influencer marketing agency of record, and that's our branding. And the whole idea of ongoing relationships is really what we're pushing. And for that reason, to say that we have a commitment to these folks to also help promote them and introduce them to each other and building a community rather than just these little one-offs. I think for all of the reasons that you listed, I think that makes a lot of sense. And of course, the ethical piece that you were talking about, that makes perfect sense too. So it seems like you are thinking primarily about your audience when you're trying to think if you're going to accept something or not, whether it's going to bring them value or, betray that sense of authenticity that they're coming back for. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that's accurate. The value I bring marketers is that I have an audience. If I don't bring my audience value, I don't have an audience. So, it's kind of this circle that feeds upon itself. If you don't bring your audience value, you are of no value to the marketer. They're not going to bring in that value themselves.
That's perfect. I think that's a perfect way to wrap that up. So tell me, how can people find you? Where should they follow you and reach out to you?
So the easy way to find me is the blog, thectoadvisor.com. And of course, I'm an influencer, so I'm on Twitter at CTO Advisor is the Twitter handle. And probably more interesting conversations happen on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
A lot of sense. And here is our open-ended Rorschach test of a question. So whatever this concept means to you, how can leaders in your industry break free? So whatever that means to you.
Wow, that is a really, I think one of the toughest things as a leader in my own organization, what helps me break free is when I'm willing to have the difficult conversations. Things that we say are difficult conversations because we're fearful of the outcome. I'm a big believer that friction brings value at the end of the day. When you not necessarily inject friction, but not avoid friction, it usually brings pretty good value. When I'm willing to tell one of my employees or one of my contributors that, you know what, the piece of work that you brought me just isn't up to our standard. None of them just go away and not bring me back a revised piece of work, but they usually come back with work that impresses me because we engaged them for a reason. We hired them for a reason. So the way to stand out is, don't avoid those difficult conversations.
I really like that idea that nothing happens without a little bit of friction, and don't be afraid to have those unpleasant conversations. That makes a whole lot of sense. Well, Keith, thank you. This has been fantastic. I have learned some new things that I'm going to go apply, and I will also be cleaning out my garage at your suggestion. But thanks so much for your time today.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me.